Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
My name is Matt.
And today's episode is episode number 10 of our Journey Through Space. And this week we are stranded in the middle of nowhere. We are stranded outside of Earth, in the middle of the galaxy. We are floating around. We are stranded in space.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to doing this topic for a while. Probably since we started doing this series.
Yeah, these are like, when we first said we were going to do a series on space, these were the two films which instantly sprang to mind.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, the two films which we will be covering in this week's episode are Gravity from 2013 and The Martian from 2015. So these are the quintessential stranded in space films.
I think so, yeah.
At least for our generation.
Yeah, and maybe alongside Apollo 13, but that's a slightly older generation than ours would cherish Apollo 13. Yeah, they really hold up. They're really good. I can't believe how old they are already, you know?
I know, it's crept up, hasn't it?
Because they feel so recent. They feel like brand new sci-fi blockbusters. And they were big movies when they came out.
Definitely, and they both did quite well. Well, they got lots of nominations, both of them, but we'll go into that as we discuss each one in depth throughout the episode.
Well, let's do that. I want to do that, James.
Okay.
Let's get into Gravity.
Okay.
Dr. Stone. Do you copy?
Yes, I copy. I'm detached.
Give me your position.
I don't know. I'm spinning. I can't.
Report your position.
GPS is down. I can't. It's down. I can't.
Give me a visual.
I told you nothing. I see nothing.
You have a visual of Explorer.
No.
You have a visual of ISS.
No.
You need to focus. Anything. The sun and the Earth. Give me coordinates.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Dr. Stone. You're burning oxygen. You have to sip, not gulp.
Gravity by Alfonso Cuarón. Is that how you pronounce it?
I think so,
We did look it up beforehand.
Yeah, Cuarón,
so we did a bit of research on the actual pronunciation this time.
I got that from a Slate website that was a pronunciation guide for the Oscars. So I wonder if that's I don't know if that's like for journalists who need to like talk and quickly need to check. Which is basically what we're doing here.
That's amazing. Next time we'll have cue cards for each of the directors and we'll just pop them up.
Yeah, we'll get an intern.
Yeah, we'll get an intern. So Gravity from 2013. This film, did you see it at the cinema when it came out?
I did. I saw it at the Brixton Ritzy in Screen 1. If anyone lives in London or lives locally, I cannot recommend it enough. If a film that you're interested in seeing is showing in Screen 1 of the Ritzy, it's just beautiful. It's very old-fashioned. It's a very modern cinema. It's a picture house cinema. All the other screens are like just normal sort of multiplex screens, but Screen 1's this lovely like proscenium arch, old-fashioned room, but with a really modern, really high-quality screen. And I don't live near there anymore, but when I did, just any chance I got to see a film at Screen 1 there, I would snap it up.
See, I saw it at Cineworld. I think it was in Leicester Square.
All right.
So completely opposite kind of cinema. It was sort of all new and fancy, massive screen.
What's your memory of seeing it?
It was just non-stop action.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, I remember such a sense of relief.
Yeah.
And that's what this film does to you. It throws you into a spin, and then by the end of it, you can breathe again. Yeah.
I remember it. I have a terrible memory just generally, and I forget films, almost immediately after we've done this podcast. I generally just don't know anything about the film. And when we're talking about it, I'm always saying like, oh, I've forgotten this bit. It was good to see it. But I was shocked by rewatching this and it's just clear as day. I remember pretty much every beat of it.
Yeah.
Because it feels like, it does cover such a short period of narrative time. It is slightly long. It's not a real-time film, but almost, and it feels it. It just feels like a couple of hours in the life of Sandra Bullock's character.
That's it. And I thought you'd like the timing of this one because it's a tight 90 minutes, isn't it?
The credits start rolling at 1 hour 20.
Oh,
I loved it.
There you go.
In and out, done, and it's a great
Straight
movie.
to the point. And the thing is, that it doesn't dilly-dally about anything in this film. It's very much like, this is happening. It's immediate. There's the immediacy in this, which really comes forward.
That's the whole, that's the biggest stylistic thing about the film is the pacing, the urgency, the tension, which is on a constant upward trajectory. We get a few little pockets where Dr. Stone catches her breath and so do the audience. But for the most part, it's just like there's device after device used to create tension. Something goes wrong. There's like the O2 level, the CO2 level, the fire, the tether breaking and a new storm coming in. Everything is just like constant upping the drama.
Yeah, she really struggles to catch a break in this film. So let's talk a little bit more about the director then. So he wrote Children of Men. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
I've seen that a few times.
Fantastic sci-fi film. That was based on the book, wasn't it? Children of Men.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he wrote the screenplay. He also wrote Roma.
I haven't seen that yet.
I haven't seen that either, but it won all the awards. I think, was it last year?
Well, that Slate article about the Oscars was from 2019, so probably
Okay,
was
that
last
makes
year.
sense then.
Or maybe it was 2018 and it was the 2019 Oscars.
Yeah.
Did he direct the time-traveling Harry Potter movie?
Yeah, Prisoner of Azkaban.
I don't really... this is not going to go down well with, I assume, a lot of listeners, but I don't really like Harry Potter. But
You are entitled to your opinion.
yeah, I'm just not... I never got into it
It's
at the
not
right
your
time.
thing, it's not your thing.
Anyway, the third film,
Don't tell Rihanna Dillon. I think she's a big Harry Potter fan.
She knows her shit on Harry Potter.
Yeah.
But I don't hate it, just not into it. But the third film is amazing. It's the time travel one where they've got like a magic watch that lets them sort of jump back in time. And it's so fun. It's such a good
Is
time
that definitely
travel
this one?
Yeah, Prisoner of Azkaban, right?
I can't remember.
I think it's the time travel one.
Okay.
But I could easily be
fingers
wrong.
crossed it's the time travel one. But yeah, the time travel
Audience
aspect's
just
always
going
good.
absolutely screaming.
People are shouting at what are you talking about? You don't know the Harry Potter films.
I'm so sorry. But he's a very good director from what I've seen of him.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's unusual for him to, like, the fact he's directed a Harry Potter film as well seems a bit, I don't know, seems a bit different to what...
I don't know what he did before that, but that was quite a long time ago. More commonly now, it's much more common now for like Hollywood to sort of pluck out a kind of little indie director who's really talented and say, just have a go on our franchise, please.
Yeah.
You know, that happens all the time now. I mean, the Harry Potter films were early 2000s, like 2001 or 2 they started. So the third one would have been, what, 4 or 5?
Yeah, because I
Long time
remember
ago.
when the first one came out, my dad had got a bootlegged copy from someone down the pub and he'd sent it to me. And yeah, that was my first memory of sort of Harry Potter.
Amazing.
Yeah, I don't know how the hell... And it was like a bootleg VHS. So yeah, I have no idea how he managed to get that.
I'm sure they're quite easy back in the day. Like they were floating around everywhere, weren't they?
Yeah, go down the pub, you find some dodgy geezer selling on the dodgy VHS. So like we said, this film is the ultimate stranded in space film, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what makes it so terrifying? We talked about what kind of things are scary about space in the previous episodes, and especially in the horror in space, but that was a totally different kind of horror.
Yeah.
Because it starts at the very start of the film, it tells you all the things which are so terrifying about space, doesn't it?
Life in space is impossible.
Yeah. Just sums it up straight like that.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were saying about the immediacy and the urgency of it, because it is, we are told about the threat of space, and we know that from other films. But this film, I think we need to talk about the way it's shot and the cinematography and the way it puts you into that threatening environment, that hostile environment, and the way you're there in it with Stone from the beginning. So we mentioned Children of Men, which is also directed by Cuarón. And it's interesting, that's the one immediately before this. That's a film that has some really good, really exciting long takes created through some digital trickery. But mostly there's a lot of practical work going on in Children of Men, a lot of rehearsal and a lot of extras to make that possible. You know, that really intense scene where he's trying to get through like a war zone.
Yeah.
And it's all just done as one take. And And I think there's an interesting bit in Children of Men where there's some blood splatter hits the camera lens as part of that. Because I don't know if that's a digital effect or a practical effect, but interesting either way that if it's practical that it's left in, and if it's digital that it was a choice to splatter the camera lens.
Yeah, and there's a moment in this where there's the water which hits the lens.
Yeah.
And there's things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the long take. So I think it's about 12 minutes, the opening shot. And it's obviously all CGI. It's not one take at all. And you can easily tell that because of how this works. I was quite surprised by how good the CGI looks.
Yeah, it looks really good, doesn't it?
I was bracing myself for it to be really dated.
Yeah.
But it looks fantastic.
I mean, that initial shot of the Earth is brilliant. And I remember, like, as soon as I saw it on my small little TV screen, I was remembering seeing it at the cinema and just how massive it felt. Like, the whole film just makes everything seem so large.
Yeah.
Like, regardless of the screen size you're watching it on, the perspectives in it are really important.
Yeah. So we've got this, like, starting with like a 12-minute long take. There are 6-7 minute shots afterwards. You know, the whole film is made up of these very long takes, and not entirely, but this initial take, it's like very, very long. It kind of puts us in space with Stone. The camera moves around in such a like floaty way. I think we're getting right into like what Stone's feeling, because they mention that she's her vitals aren't great. She feels a little bit nauseous, but she says no more than usual. She's not someone who's comfortable in space, and we're kind of floating around in a way that I think helps us get into her headspace a little bit. It doesn't look like really any other film, because we're bobbing around like an astronaut as if we're out there, and we can't, as an audience, we don't feel very planted anywhere. There's no like cameras fixed to ships looking at the astronauts.
Yeah, it's all very fluid, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's sort of heightened, you know, the camera, like, it passes through the barrier of her helmet at one point. So we get a point of view shot of hers, and then it passes back out to a close. So it goes from close up to point of view to close up, which is a really standard way to frame some shots.
Yeah.
But it's done as one take with the camera moving in and out. So we've got this sort of magical camera that's telling us the story, but it's also getting us into her headspace. So we don't just need point of view shots and first person view, which they do use. It's also giving us this kind of fluid movement that gives a sense of what she's feeling as well. Yeah. I think that's how they're setting it up at the beginning. Yeah, and obviously her emotional state is juxtaposed by George Clooney's character and the other astronaut, who we don't really get a shot of his face throughout the beginning of it. So they're having a lovely time out on their spacewalk. George Clooney is listening to some sort of country and western music. He's flying about. The other guy is jumping off, and they're just having a fun time. Yeah, and I think it's important as well that he has such freedom of movement and such control over this jetpack. So this film is going to go on to just be Sandra Bullock's film, but at the start it kind of looks like it's a two-wheeler. Yeah. And it's kind of like marketed a little bit like a two-wheeler, but it's Sandra Bullock all the way. I don't think that the audience really gets into George Clooney's headspace, because it's such a disorientating camera work that we don't really, I didn't feel any association with the guy that's like moving around freely and he's all like athletic with his jetpack. Yeah. You know, he seems like he's on another level to what we're experiencing, floating around aimlessly. He's in control. Yeah, that's it. And that control is quite short-lived though, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. But he always maintains the same attitude. Yeah, because his character is very level-headed. He doesn't panic throughout the whole thing. No. And he's always like either playing music or cracking jokes. And I love those things about his character. So so George Clooney plays Matt Kowalski. Yeah. And he's a guy who, like I said, is cracking jokes throughout the whole sort of first half of the film. And he keeps talking to Houston and then sort of recounting different things that have happened to him. He's got all these little anecdotes about his life on Earth, and Houston is sick of hearing them because they've heard every single anecdote he's got. Yeah. Apart from the one that he's just starting to tell as everything goes to shit. Yeah, he's really experienced, isn't he? That's where he gets this control and calmness. He's on the way out career-wise, isn't he? I think it's suggested this is his last mission, because he's saying, I'm going to miss this. And he's trying to break the spacewalk record, isn't he? Yeah. So you've got him. He's like a rock emotionally and logically for all the characters. He's the guy who he's the guy you'd want in an emergency, but we lose him quite quickly in the sort of grand scheme of the film.
Yeah.
What, about a third of the way in?
Yeah, and then in contrast, you've got Sandra Bullock, who is playing Ryan Stone. So Stone is a rookie. This is the first time she's really been into space. She's used to working in a lab.
I got the impression that she wasn't meant to be like a full-time astronaut. Like she had some particular scientific skills that NASA needed on a particular mission, but maybe she wouldn't be going back up.
Yeah, because even like at the start, she's in like a brace or something, isn't she?
Yeah.
It's like a transport brace. I think that's the best way I could describe it.
Yeah, because she hasn't got the skill to use a jetpack or just sort of free on a tether and make her way across. They strap her into like a crane.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So again, that's like the contrast of those two characters, and that's where all the excitement comes from and the tension, because you know that she doesn't know that much about being up in space. You know that George Clooney does.
Yeah.
So it's this weird sort of like, who's going to make it? Who should make it?
And that's quite important for her character journey as well, isn't it? Because she's kind of pathetic in the first third of the film until she loses George Clooney. She's not much use. She's panicking. She's afraid. George Clooney has to save her life, talk her through just staying alive, so she doesn't, use up all the oxygen in her tanks through panicking. He's like this superhero in space, and she's just the sort of damsel in distress. But then we lose him, and she is forced by circumstance to become completely independent and just drive her own story.
Yeah, and we, of course, are identifying with Stone, because if we were up in space, we'd be in her position.
Yeah, none of us are Clooney.
Yeah, and then we're not going to be Clooney. As much as we want to be, we're not going to be him in space.
Yeah. And of course, there's that transition is represented. There's a really famous shot where she curls up into the fetal position.
Yeah.
So she finally gets aboard. Is it the ISS at that point? I lost track of which station or satellite. She gets aboard a satellite.
Yeah, it is the ISS.
Yeah.
The International Space Station.
Clooney, she's already had to let Clooney go because things have just gone increasingly disastrously wrong.
So what is the precursor to all this? What happens?
Right, yeah. The Russians shoot down their own satellite. It's like they decommission it, but they do it by exploding it.
Yeah, it's like a spy satellite, isn't it? They reckon.
Yeah, they imply that the only reason you'd destroy a decommissioned satellite is because they don't want it getting into someone else's hands. So it must be a spy satellite.
Because this is a real thing that people are actually worried that could happen.
Is it?
Yeah, so it's known as the Kessler Syndrome, which is named after a NASA scientist called Donald J. Kessler. So he proposed this theory in 1978 that let me get this right so I can get the sciencey bits right. So if something like this happened, it would trigger a catastrophic chain reaction of debris. So
exactly
exactly
the way
what
it happens in the film.
So the orbiting debris field would make it impossible to launch space exploration missions or satellites for many decades.
Really?
Yeah. So it's like, if this were to happen, the debris would just keep going round and round and round.
So what are we doing to avoid that? I guess we're just not blowing up stuff in orbit.
Yeah, I'd hope that's not what they're doing. But yeah, because they'd because Kowalski says, oh no, Facebook's going to be down for a lot of people and stuff like that. But this is like all of the satellites are just gone because of this one satellite which has collided with another and this chain reaction has started. And that's what's causing these guys in the film the problem.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, it's like a little, a small scale asteroid belt just in orbit around the planet, isn't it? It's the satellites are getting smashed into little bits of debris. Those bits of debris are moving so fast, they'll tear through the next satellite they meet. That satellite becomes part of the debris and And
there's nothing that will slow them down because in space, it'll just keep going at whatever sort of trajectory it's at and just keep going round and round.
It's terrifying and it's intense and it works really well.
Yeah, and it comes so suddenly in the film. You see like little flickers of something. And the film plays with that and the perspectives of everything. You're always looking in the background for something terrifying. And there's the moment where the other astronaut just gets hit by something, and you see him in the background of the shot.
Yeah.
And it's so small.
He's tethered and he just pings.
Yeah, and it's like you wouldn't even notice. And then later on, you see the impact of that debris in his head, and it's torn a complete hole through his helmet and his face. And the only reason that that Stone could recognize him is because there's a photo like hanging from his spacesuit.
Yeah.
It's just,
It's very grisly. It's like the only really grisly moment.
yeah,
isn't it?
that's the only really, grisly moment.
But we're constantly aware of the danger, even though nothing else really grisly and violent happens. The danger is palpable, very much in the same way that it is in Apollo 13, right?
Yeah.
This threat of we're just a few millimeters away from disaster at all times.
Explorer, this is Houston.
Go ahead, Houston.
Mission abort. Repeat. Mission abort.
Explorer, this is Kowalski confirming visual contact with debris. Debris is from a BSC sat. Repeat. I have it ready.
Dr. Stone requesting faster transport.
We have to go. We have to go, go,
Kennedy
go.
reports meteorological conditions. Don't go.
Houston, Explorer, copy. Explorer, Dr. Stone requesting faster transport to Bay Area.
So she's forced to deal with that disaster and move on and become her own savior. No one's going to save her. They lose communication. And she transitions very nicely from this sort of damsel in distress to the hero of the film with this rebirth scene, because she gets into the ISS and she curls up into a ball. It's amazing. It's like, it's so good. Because I've seen some of the behind the scenes stuff, and I know there's a lot of green screen. You'll see the actors wearing a helmet, and then it's just green screen. Like that's how most of the outer stuff was done. I loved this shot because, there's only so much you can CGI, and just when you see something, you're like, I don't know how they've done this. I don't believe that she's in 0G because of how expensive and complicated that was when we were looking at Apollo 13. It was just amazing to see, and it looks fantastic, and they dwell on it for 20 seconds. It's great.
It is a brilliant shot, and it's so important to her character arc as well, isn't it? Because she's been through all that stuff, and then she's sort of shedding her spacesuit, and she's sort of like, she's almost being born again in this horrendous situation. And from there on out, she's on her own. She's got to sort of deal with all of these things that are coming at her, sort of bit by bit. And but that shot you're talking about as well. So do you know how they did it?
I think it was a bit more green screen, but I don't know the details.
So again, IMDb, the source of many a fact for me, it says that she was sat on a rig with a bicycle seat and had her right leg strapped into a 2-part brace inside a specially made chamber. She then mimed movements that were carefully choreographed, and the camera rig was rotated slowly to create the illusion of hers and the ISS's rotation.
Great. So she just stays upright and slowly curls into a ball.
Yeah.
With a brace on.
And then they CGI out that.
So she's standing on one leg basically.
Yeah.
And then with the rest of her body curls up into the fetal position and rotate the camera around her. Of course, it's pretty simple. That's how you do it. It makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, it's so effective in that shot because you don't think about how it's done or anything like that. It's the symbolism of it.
Yeah, it's very on the nose, but good.
But it looks beautiful.
It looks very beautiful.
And especially after all that drama, you kind of want her to have a bit of a rest because it's just all been a bit much. Because she's lost, Kowalski's dead, isn't he?
Kowalski's dead, everyone's dead. She's about a couple of minutes later, she's going to go on the radio to no one and say that she's the sole survivor of the mission.
Yeah. And the moment, a few moments ago, she was being catapulted into space, into nowhere. And though that whole scene as well is amazing, she's just spinning round and round and
at the start where she first gets stranded. Yeah. So that's actually the end of the first shot of the movie. So it's all been one take up to that point. And so we've got this sort of locationing of the camera and the audience around her in various disorienting ways. And it lasts until that moment where she is getting lost. So I like the way that we stay so close to her for so long. And then it's when in this moment of feeling completely lost in space that finally the camera loses sight of her and she's just tumbling away.
Yeah. And that movement when she's going round and round, like she's doing a sort of weird kind of flip.
Yeah.
That's a sticker on Instagram. If you go into your Instagram stories, you can use it as like a GIF.
Oh, right.
And it's just going round and round.
Lovely.
So guys, feel free to use that in your Instagram stories.
Yeah, nice. So we've seen a lot of scenes where people get rescued after being blown out of an airlock. I was trying to think if we'd seen an example where we see it from the point of view of the person being rescued the whole time. You know, Europa Report, that's a great one. He goes flying out away from the airlock and we see it from his point of view and we kind of experience the tragedy of it because he's still in communication, but he doesn't get rescued.
Yeah.
Maybe in... So is it Sunshine? We see people getting rescued as they're flying through space. Event Horizon, Lawrence Fishburne does that like rugby tackle, but we're watching him do it. George Clooney kind of comes out of nowhere. We're there with Sandra Bullock just freaking out, and we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. And
we don't see how George Clooney's sort of keeping track of things. And you know, if he was the hero of the story, we'd probably follow him trying to save Sharif and then realizing he can't, and then trying to get in touch with Stone and all that. But we just stay with her as she's like heavy breathing, panicking, worried.
Yeah. I can't think of an instance where it has just been that person who we're following, the person in distress.
Yeah.
Like obviously they cut to shots where you can see they're in distress. They're being sort of like they're going off into the ether. But yeah, I can't think of any just offhand.
Yeah. But it works great, doesn't it? To have him kind of come in and save the day. It builds to that idea of the character being so in control of things, but not someone that we associate with because, you know, we need to be feeling the fear that Stone's feeling.
Yeah. And he's so in control. He's like, he straps her up and then it's like he's taking her off on a walk or something. Like she's a dog almost.
Yeah. So she has this big rebirth. That is one of the big themes of the film, but I don't think it's the only thing happening. What I found interesting was that it's a intensely emotional way of telling this type of story. What other themes were coming through with that storytelling? Because it's not all about the kind of science and the NASA stuff, is it?
Yeah, it's about the characters' journeys as well, and they do a lot of backstory stuff.
Yeah, for so little dialogue, relatively speaking.
Exactly, and it's all just told through like their stories about life back on Earth.
Yeah,
and Kowalski kind of like gets these stories out of Stone by trying to sort of calm her down and getting her to think about what life was like on Earth and what you would be doing round about now if you were back there. Yeah. So you find out more about their characters by looking at how they were when they were back on Earth.
Yeah. That's where we first get the major backstory, isn't it? We've had this we've had this whole sequence of her being floaty and stranded and tetherless, and it's as George Clooney's kind of bringing her back, he's also trying to bring her back psychologically and say, like, well, you know, tell me what you'd be doing, and that's when she talks about her daughter who died, and it tells us a lot about her mindset because he's really trying hard to bring her back to the things that make her feel good and what's waiting for you back on Earth. And her response is to talk about the daughter that she lost, which is obviously a huge trauma for her, which is not very helpful for what George Clooney's trying to achieve in that scene, is it? It kind of indicates that she's actually maybe getting towards giving up at that point.
Yeah, because the anxiety she's feeling about being in space is the same as the anxiety she feels being back on Earth in some ways, because the dealing with the loss of her daughter has kind of led her to throw herself into her work that much more. So she says that she keeps driving all the time and she drives to work and drives back and she'll just put the radio on. She won't put any talk radio on. She just tries to like block the world out. Yeah. And that's part of the joy of being in space for her in some ways, is because it's so quiet. There's no sound. There's nothing there. It's completely away from all of those things which obviously remind her of her daughter. So it's having that sort of like, she's kind of run away from her life, hasn't she, in some ways?
I think so. And what she's found up there is another intensely traumatic experience. And I think that's the big thing that film's about, isn't it? She has this kind of moment of rebirth, and that's her dealing with the trauma and actually making a decision to either give up and give in, which she kind of looks like she's going to do before she has that moment, or move on with your life. It's just this big metaphor for her kind of having to get to grips with what happened to her daughter and make a decision about how she wants to get on with her life or not.
Yeah, because she could just so easily just give up on everything. And there is that moment that you just mentioned where you think she is going to give up. So what did you think about that moment in the film where she puts up the oxygen, she turns the oxygen down, doesn't she?
Yeah, it reminded me of, don't they talk, is it Contact that we were talking about where, so it's a rumor or a myth or we're not really sure. They talk in Contact about giving the cyanide pills to the astronauts and NASA's response, I think when we were doing the research for that episode, NASA's response was like, no, we don't do anything like that. Don't be silly. Anyway, if astronauts wanted to kill themselves in space, they'd just get rid of all the oxygen.
Yeah.
It's just like, whoa. So you guys have thought about this. And yeah, it's exactly how she does
what
it.
she's doing, yeah.
She just cranks the knobs and starts to vent all the oxygen out of the room.
And before that, she's talking to some guy on the radio. So do you know anything about, like, what did you think of that bit? Because it comes a bit left field, doesn't it? This weird guy.
I
that she's
liked
talking
it. This
to.
whole scene's really good. I remember when I saw it in the cinema, he's speaking in another language.
Yeah.
Us ignorant English-only speakers don't know what that language might be, but she assumes it might be Chinese because she's trying to get to the Chinese station at that point. And then she hears, like, barking or chickens or something in the back, some kind of wildlife.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, I've got some ham radio enthusiast on Earth. I remember some of the stuff. I never watched it, but there's a short film or something that sort of tells that story from the other side.
That's it, yeah. So apparently Jonas Cuarón did a short film in 2013.
Who's that, Jonas?
I think he must
son.
be. I think he must be either the son or the brother of
Okay,
Alfonso.
cool.
So his film was following a Inuit fisherman, and so in that film, the Inuit is going around with his dog sled and his baby daughter, and they're camping on the ice over a frozen ford.
And he's got a radio.
Yeah,
Right.
and apparently what he's trying to tell Stone is that his dog's very ill and he's considering putting it out of its misery. So it's all this kind of extra layer of stuff that's going on. And so the inspiration for that film, so it was his son. It was his son who did that. And that came from sort of doing the location scouting on a different movie in Greenland.
Before or after Gravity?
So it was 2013, and then
About the
Gravity
same
was...
time,
Yeah, so it must have been around about the same time.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, I love that idea that there's more going on, and they've actually pictured the story from the other side.
Yeah.
Because you're so separated from that in this film. Because you don't see Earth or anything like that, or any sort of other human beings in the story until the end. Because in quite a few of these space films we looked at, you've got the people back home and you've got them trying to sort of sort things out as well.
Yeah, NASA Mission Control, Houston, very depersonified. You hear their voices. There is a little bit of, banter, I guess, with Kowalski, but we never see them in person. They're just a sort of disembodied face on the radio that, they abort the mission, don't they, at the start? They just very suddenly out of the blue go, mission abort, get back inside. Whereas, we'll talk about it later in The Martian or in Apollo 13, the sort of alternative way of showing that is showing the build-up of, the engineers and the astro researchers sort of getting a glimpse of this oncoming storm and build up the tension a different way. But that's not the way Cuarón wants to tell this story. It's about Stone's immediate experience of it.
Yeah, because it is, they say that they refer to them as Houston in the blind.
Yeah.
So it's so important that you don't see anybody back home, and you've got this kind of like disconnect. And I think for me that made all of the stories they were telling much more vivid, because I was imagining them as they were telling them.
Yeah.
And because they're in these situations, you kind of like have your own ideas. And it's kind of like in Solaris when they talk about the giant baby and stuff like that, like really weird images. Sometimes I like that better in films when, like, I know you shouldn't do too much exposition in a film because that defeats the object because it's a visual medium. But I do like it when they tell their stories and you have to get all of that imagery from just how they tell it and the acting.
You mean like the anecdotes that Kowalski's telling? Yeah. I mean, it's not expositionary, is it? It's a pure character moment, and it's a very human, despite the fact they're disembodied and far away, it's a relatable human moment that, like, you're doing this quite tense, dangerous work, but your communication that you want to keep you calm would just be, I just want to tell you about the time I met a girl at like a fair and I wanted to go up to her,
That, and of course Stone's story about her daughter.
Yeah.
So it's like all of that, you get it in a different way, and it's just important for their characters.
Yeah, it is good.
Huntington, make your dogs bark again for me, would you please? Your dogs, you know. Woof woof. Dogs. Oh. Woof woof.
Yeah, so we have this. I really like that moment. I remember watching it in the cinema. You know, where she sort of just starts imitating the howling of the dog on the radio. It's great. It's, again, it goes back to how this is a really emotional way of telling a stranded in space story. So she has this kind of like just sort of bark at the moon, howl at the moon moment, you know, just like let it all out.
Yeah.
And she's crying and the teardrops are floating away from her face. It reminded me of, remember when we watched Ad Astra and Brad Pitt cries and it's the only thing in the scene that's obeying gravity, or it's, I guess it's disobeying gravity because it's trickling down his cheek. But yeah, Stone's tears are just drifting off away from her and she's just doing this raw, kind of silly, but like she's got nothing else to give and she just wants to sort of scream a bit, so she imitates a howling dog.
I know, it's great. But like the gravity thing as well, I mean, the film is called Gravity.
Yeah.
But the flames as well, that made me think of the flames when she goes on the ISS.
Yeah.
And you see they're just floating around these
they're
flames.
like droplets.
Yeah, they're like
of
droplets.
fire, yeah.
Which is something you never really think about, and then it's that sort of preempting thing that they keep doing. So like when you see one bit of debris and then you see a bit more in the background. And with this, you see these droplets of fire and you know something bad's going to happen, but then you kind of like almost immediately forget about it because she's got so much else going on and she's got to do this, she's got to do that. But you know in the back of your head, something else is going to happen now.
Yeah.
And there's all this foreshadowing that the film keeps doing.
It weirdly reminded me of Event Horizon as well, because there's a line of dialogue where I think it's Lawrence Fishburne's characters, because he's got a traumatic experience of dealing with fire in space. And I think he asks another character, have you ever seen fire in 0G? It just sort of flickers away and flickers up the walls. But it doesn't look very good in Event Horizon when we see it later.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, seeing it as that foreshadowing, threatening little, you know, currently harmless droplet of fire, but you know it's going to get worse.
It looks kind of cute though, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little blob.
Were there any other things which you were like, oh, that reminds me of this, or that reminds me of that? Because there's one moment I definitely remember.
Go on.
So the big thing for me was the Destination Moon bit, Destination Moon / Wall-E.
Oh yeah.
So she uses the extinguisher.
She Wallies away into...
Yeah. It's like this the third time we've seen this in films we've looked at.
Yeah.
Using an extinguisher in space. So that's the first thing I'm going to grab if I ever end up in space.
Yeah, not a shotgun, was it? Was that the original idea? That was the original idea in Destination Moon.
Yeah.
Even the fire extinguisher, because it's a bit... It does get a bit far... I mean, this is a very far-fetched film because it's so intense and so insane, everything that happens to her. But I actually think that the way... You know when Wall-E uses it and he goes into a complete free spin and his head's like stationary... That's actually more how I imagine it would be. Like, it'd be too powerful to control, right?
Yeah.
Because she first uses it to try and put out fire on the station, and she immediately bangs her head. She gets thrown back, cracks her head open, and gets knocked out. It's really hard to imagine, like, effectively using it, because you think it's just like, well, I'll just point it away from me, and I'll nicely, steadily move directly backwards. But it's like, no, you won't. Like,
it's going to go however it's going to go.
Yeah, and you'll start spinning, because if you're holding it at about torso height, then your back's going to start spinning and your leg, you know, that's how I imagine it. But the point is that she's had her rebirth. She's in more control of her emotional journey and her physical journey. She's able to, you know, Wall-E her way to the Chinese station or whichever one it is.
That's it. And it's the fact that she's sort of accepted what's happening to her at that point. And she says, like, oh, Kowalski, if you see my daughter up there, if you see a brown-haired girl with scruffy hair or something like that, just say hello. It says, Mummy loves you. And she's accepted the death of her daughter at this point. And she's realised that she wants to carry on living. So she's going to do everything she can in order to survive.
Yeah.
And she has that weird dream where she sees Kowalski.
Yeah, so that's happening immediately after the sort of suicide oxygen level moment, isn't it?
Do you remember when you first saw that?
Yeah, I was like, this is a step too far. This is ridiculous.
Were you like, is this real? Is this happening?
I assumed it was, yeah, and I just thought, what? How?
Why has he just opened the hatch and she's got
yeah,
no helmet on?
And I was a bit frustrated, I think, when I first saw it. I was like, because there's a lot of suspension of disbelief to go along with the kind of tension of it.
Yeah.
So I guess that was the one moment where this rewatching of it was a different experience, because I knew it wasn't actually happening. I knew it was a dream sequence, and I could enjoy that more because the way he's talking to her, it is that, you know, that in control, calm Kowalski from before, but now it's like it's her Jiminy Cricket kind of character who's there to get her back to herself, and it's her talking to herself as she's presumably sort of passing out from lack of oxygen, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of like a nice end to Kowalski's story as well.
Yeah.
It just rounds off his story a little bit more than just sort of leaving him to just go off in the distance, even though I loved that.
Yeah.
And the fact he's just going off listening to his music and he's like, oh, it looks lovely, and sort of like,
Yeah.
this is what's happening now. I've accepted it.
But to kind of round off his story, he's become a person in her life who is one of those people where in times of need, she's like, what would Kowalski say to me at this? If I'm like this, you know, what would he say? What would he do? And he would say, pull yourself together. Do you want to kill yourself, or do you want to get on with your life?
Yeah.
And
Because
she needs that.
He is the mentor figure in this film.
Yeah.
And in the hero's journey, because there's always like a wise mentor. So it's like he's that who plays that role.
So that scene is showing the lasting effect of that mentorship, isn't it? It's not just he's not just good for her because he can fly out with a jetpack and save her. He has, you know, imparted wisdom on her. She's grown from her relationship with him, and she's able to. Because it is after that point where she gives him that message. Yeah. About where she's basically showing that she's moving on from her daughter's death and going to continue with life. That's the growth that she's got from Kowalski, isn't it?
Exactly.
Your kid died. Doesn't get any rougher than that. But still, it's a matter of what you do now. If you decide to go, then you got to just get on with it. Sit back, enjoy the ride.
You got to plant both your feet on the ground and start living life.
How did you get here?
I'm telling you, it's a hell of a story.
Hey, Ryan.
What?
It's time to go home.
So we were talking about before, like, the kind of films it reminded us of. Certainly there's a lot of stuff that we've seen in this series and our last series with Wall-E, but also, you know, outside of the wider genre of sci-fi. I think we talked with Mike when we did our episode on that. We mentioned All Is Lost. We were talking about, you know, what would be so scary about being in space and how All Is Lost would actually make a really good space film, just do the same thing. It kind of feels like Gravity is that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I actually don't know which one came out first. I feel like they were about the same time. But it's All Is Lost boils it down to a real tight sort of vision of it, which is there is literally only one character in the film. I think maybe you see some other people at the beginning or the end, but it's just Robert Redford for about 90 minutes with everything going wrong, increasingly so. And that's exactly what this film feels like, except instead of the dangerous ocean everywhere, it's space.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good way of looking at it, because it is like a shipwreck kind of thing, isn't it? Like you were saying.
Yeah.
And that's not normally how you would look at these kind of films.
No. But I think The Martian plays with that idea as well.
Yeah.
In a slightly different way.
Yeah, definitely. It's like in every sort of shipwreck film, generally they end with the person being saved. Yeah. Or saving themselves. And that's exactly what Stone's character does.
And it's got to be her saving herself in this film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's all about that growth of her character and the fact we've followed her so intensely. Because also in this film, we talked about the point of view. It looks like a video game in certain shots.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit where she's on a station kind of pulling herself through, and it's all it's all first person.
Yeah, like a first person shooter kind of thing that you're running around. But yeah, that whole end bit, so she's going off with the extinguisher. She manages to get to the next place, the Chinese space station, and then
which is already, I think, crashing into Earth.
Yeah, it's going further into orbit, and then it's so intense because in a lot of the film, she's grabbing for stuff to try and hold on and sort of like get a grip, basically, of the situation. And in this final scene, she's really going for it a whole lot more than she did previously.
Yeah, she's increasingly more capable to do that sort of. She's like Spider-Man in the last bit of the film, isn't she? She's kind of like grabbing, swinging. You know, she's got no fear. She's just all into it.
Yeah, because before she was getting tangled up in stuff, and that was the only thing that was sort of like keeping her from spiraling out of control. And she's having a real tough time of it. It's like she keeps getting stuck on things. The space station gets stuck on something.
Yeah.
Everything's just going wrong. But with this, she's taking control. She grabs something. She misses it. She grabs something again. She's got it.
Yeah.
And then she makes her way into the actual station.
And then when she's on board, she finally gets in that capsule. And after all of that, she's kind of earned that control through the character arc she's had. But then she gives it all up again, doesn't she? The ship's crashing. Everything's on course to either work or not work. And she says that. She has a little bit of monologue where she just goes, I don't know what's going to happen. One or two things are going to happen. I'm going to survive or I'm going to die. I can't remember how she phrases it.
She says like, oh, I'm going to have one hell of a story, good story to tell people, or I'm going to burn up in the atmosphere, and then that'll be it.
And that's it. And that's all she can do. And she's done so much. She's shown that she's able to... She's so in control when she was outside working her way in. But this is the point where even Kowalski wouldn't have been able to do any more than she had done at this point. She's just got to strap in, hope for the best as we maybe burn up on re-entry.
Yeah.
And then she crash lands into a body of water, probably a lake, I think, by the looks of it. And it's just like the final kind of insult is that she blows the door off and the water just comes pummeling in. It's brutal and it's so scary.
And to think she's probably hasn't got much muscle mass either if she's been up in space.
Yeah. And also she's wearing that massive suit that's filling, and you see it because when she gets out, she sinks. The suit's full of water. It's got extra weight that's just working against her. It's just this final moment of tension. It's just been a constant ramping up, and you think, well, parachutes deployed, nice safe landing in water, we're back. You know, that's how Apollo 13 ends, and then the crew come and rescue them, and it's a happy ending. But not for Stone. She's got to have this last moment of just brutal nature acting against her that she's got to pull herself out of, physically climb out of.
Yeah, and again, she's getting rid of the spacesuit. She's shedding that weight, and then she like crawls to land, doesn't she? And there's suddenly all this nature everywhere. There's a frog that goes flying past when she's underwater. There's flies. There's the sound of the world. And this is something which we haven't properly mentioned, but the sound is so good in this film.
It sounds gorgeous, yeah. There's a lot of internal sound bumps and echoes that you hear as if you're inside a helmet.
Yeah.
Because it says there's no... another thing it says at the start of the film is there's no atmosphere to carry sound. Some sci-fi films and TV shows do go with that soundless space, like Firefly and Battlestar Galactica do a lot of like space battles where there's no sound, and it kind of looks like security cameras on the outside of the ships are recording it. This one has also sort of gone down the same route of saying there's no sound, but because we're on a personal journey with a character, we hear it in the same way she would, which is just the dings and bumps that you would hear with it because your suit's got atmosphere. And that's conducting.
Yeah, it's whenever she's grabbing something, that conducts the sound, doesn't it? So it's all those elements, and then that in combination with the amazing score, and the score really ramps things up all the time.
Definitely.
And like I remember that the first moment when the debris hits, there's like it really comes in with dramatic music, and it kind of like shakes you. It's just really ominous. So all of these things and the sort of lack of sound, the sort of like the swells of music. And then finally she's back on Earth and you've got all of this naturalistic sound.
Yeah.
And it's a whole different kind of experience.
But I think there's another big swelling, isn't there, when she pulls herself up off the ground. So she gets herself to shore and she's like kind of grabbing like a baby on the sand in a really grateful way. I think she even says thank you. And there's like the tension is still there, even though it's like she's finally safe, but we haven't quite had like a climactic finish. And it's the pulling herself to her feet is the way they do it. There's an amazing little camera movement where we're looking at her lying down and she's deciding to sort of press herself up with her arms, and the camera's panning up as if to follow her up, but she drops down and the camera is half a second too late to follow her back down. So it kind of looks like it might have been an ad-libbed moment, but I don't think it was, because then she stands up and the camera doesn't follow her. So obviously the movement was very carefully planned. It started to follow her, it drops back down, and then it just holds on her feet. And then when she stood up, it's a really heroic shot, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like tilted upwards, isn't it?
Yeah, she's statuesque, isn't she? We're seeing her from kind of waist up, just looking at like her chin, really. She looks really powerful.
And you just see the sky, don't you? You don't see anything else. So it's like she's conquered it all.
And I think, does she just walk out of shot? Is that the very end moment
she
of the film?
walks out of shot and then you see the surroundings, don't you?
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, and you sort of see this like green, lush place where she's landed. I'm not sure where that is, but it's just like, finally we're back home.
I love the fact...
made it through the storm.
Yeah, I love the fact that the danger isn't over for her because she's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
She'll be tracked by NASA. They'll be all over it. Well, maybe. They haven't got communication, satellites down, but the danger's not over, but, we're not worried about her. After what we've seen her go through, she's on terra firma. She's fine.
It's like, what more can happen to her now?
Yeah.
Now she's back on Earth.
Yeah, she's resilient.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And that's your climactic moment, isn't it? Because the music's swelling up as she stands up, and then just seeing her as this statuesque, powerful figure, that's when you're done. That's when you know she's safe. She's got everything under control, and you just feel like, well, she's more sturdy than Kowalski ever was.
Yeah.
She's really powerful.
And it's this evolution of her character, isn't it? So she started off a scared woman who's like in space, a bit out of her depth. She comes through all these things and she sort of like has that rebirth moment in space. She has another rebirth moment when she crawls back onto land. And it's like evolution, isn't it? Because she's like crawling from the sea like we did as a species millions and millions of years ago.
And you said that we see a frog, and obviously that's a digital frog that's been put in there deliberately. It would have been froggy type creatures, right? That were the first things
all
to
quite deliberate,
crawl onto
isn't
land.
it?
Yeah. There's definitely an evolutionary statement being made there about life crawling onto land, and then
and maybe coming from the stars.
Maybe not. Nice. So this is a film that like we said, it feels like a shipwreck, but it's like watching the shipwreck happen for about 80 minutes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Contrasting to that is the next film we're going to talk about, right? The Martian is more about what happens after the shipwreck.
Yeah, the longevity of it.
Yeah. Should we get onto that?
Let's do it.
I guarantee you that at some point, everything's gonna go south on you.
Ready?
And you're gonna say, this is it. This is how I end.
Commander, Mark is dead.
We have to go now.
Now you can either accept that, or you can get to work.
This will come as quite a shock to my crewmates. And to NASA. And to the entire world. But I'm still alive.
The Martian, then. I'd not watched The Martian before.
What a treat.
I was very excited to watch it.
What did you think?
I thought it was bloody great.
It is, isn't it? It's a really
I was
good film.
completely, I was surprised by the tone of it. I didn't know what to expect. All I knew was it's Matt Damon on Mars. And that's all I had to go. And Ridley Scott, of course, directed it. So I knew it was going to be good.
It's going to look good.
It's going to look good.
I don't think...
Let's not talk about all of Ridley Scott's back catalogue.
Okay.
But yeah, no, so I went in sort of thing, because you'd recommended it to me previously as well. You said how good it was.
Yeah.
So what were your first experiences of watching it?
I read the book.
Okay, brilliant, because I was going to ask you about this.
The book is very, very good. It's really fun, it's quite breezy.
Mm-hmm.
You can read it quite quickly. Bit of a holiday book kind of thing, but an excellent sci-fi story. It's really well researched. I know the guy who wrote it spent a lot of time talking to NASA scientists, botanists, I guess, he would have been talking to.
Yeah.
Because parts that I love in the book that I don't think the film quite captures as well as it could, but I understand why they haven't done it, is that in the book, it feels like you're reading about someone growing potatoes for just like hundreds of pages.
Yeah.
But it's constantly gripping because he's really going into like, he's doing the maths, as he says in the film, I've got to do the math. He's doing the maths of like exactly, not just like how many potatoes he needs. He gets into like the calorific value of the potatoes and what a human body needs per day and all of this. And like, it's just really, really compelling. And then from what I remember, it's been ages since I read it. It feels like it's kind of like first half of the book is growing potatoes. Second half of the book is driving to the Ares 4 launch site. It definitely feels like in the book he's in that rover for a lot longer than he's in it in the film. And again, it's because it's not very filmic. You have to kind of speed that journey up because we can't just watch him in.
Do you think the film does the book justice?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I think they change plot-wise. They change nothing actually. Maybe a few little minor details they tweak, but it's faithful to the book. It's a very good adaptation of it. You mentioned the tone because it is quite a funny. No, that's not right. There's humor in the book and there's humor in the film. But I know that this got nominated at the Globes, didn't it?
Yeah, so it got nominated for, what did it get? It was Best Comedy or Musical at the Golden Globes.
And did it win or not?
Yeah, it won Best Motion Picture.
In that category,
yeah. So it did win.
In that category, yeah. You know, I remember being a bit annoyed about that when that was happening because it doesn't seem...
Just like Judd Apatow.
What, was he annoyed?
He was annoyed. He was like...
Did he have a comedy film in the running?
Well, he probably did, but he was like, oh, why is this in there? Because it's not...
It's not a comedy film.
Yeah.
I got over that when I realised that award shows just kind of doesn't really matter and it's all nonsense anyway.
There is a lot of comedy in this, though, isn't there?
Yeah. There's Watney is a kind of gallows humour character.
Yeah.
And I think it adds to that like you've got Donald Glover, who definitely at this point in his career was big time comedy guy. His career's gone in different directions now, and he plays it for laughs.
Yeah.
Kristen Wiig's in it.
Mm-hmm. Again,
who is
comedy.
Like a huge comedy star, but it's not a comedic performance from her. She's playing it straight. And she's good, but it's not a comedic performance. She could have played an incredibly hilarious character, because she is, but that's not what it's about.
I mean, this film, though, it made me laugh out loud in so many moments.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind that I was watching this on my own.
What were the bits that really got you?
Just there's so many lines of dialogue which just cracked me up. Like when he says, I'm a space pirate.
Yeah.
Call me Captain Blondebeard.
Yeah, that's good.
And the disco music references. There's so many like funny, quick lines which just made me properly laugh out loud.
Yeah. How do you feel that cuts through the tension? So it's the total opposite to Gravity, which is the shipwrecking happening, which is terrifying and upsetting constantly for 80 minutes.
Yeah.
This deals with over a year, I think, of this guy's life. How does that humour line up with that tension?
Yeah, because it felt easier going in that regard. Because the tension was there, because you know that there's always the threat of something going bad. Because especially, so they talk about how Mars is inhospitable. There's sort of like, you can't breathe outside. You need this habitat. There's no food. There's all of these problems he's coming up against. So that threat is there, but it's the way he treats all of these scenarios. He's very sort of like, this could happen, but I'm not going to let it happen.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to have a laugh and I'm going to live my life how I can while I'm here.
Yeah. It's much, they drop in those moments of tension. It's more like a set piece and it's more traditional in terms of how you structure a film, whereas Gravity is all pure, raw emotion, really, right? Everything goes wrong all the time and it's quite short and brief.
I don't think you can sustain that for the length of this.
No, exactly. Yeah. It's more traditional. It's a lot longer, so you drop in the tension as set pieces and it works, but I don't know. Do you think one works better than the other? Or?
I think they both work in different ways.
Yeah.
I think I preferred this film just because it's more of the kind of thing I like. It's just takes you on more of a, it takes you on a journey in the same way that Gravity does, but for this there's breathing room, so you can just enjoy the moments. And I love the optimism of this film as well.
Yeah.
So there's no body count in this.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody dies. It's very optimistic in that regard. And just the way that Matt Damon's character, so it's Watney, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the way that Watney's dealing with this situation, this impossible situation, but he's not going to let it get him down. He's going to sort of like keep calm and carry on.
It's a real love letter to NASA and scientists and engineers and the type of person you need to be. It's one thing it's got in common with Gravity, it is about human willpower to overcome adversity, but this film is taking a more kind of the human intelligence to overcome adversity over a long period of time, where Gravity is more about showing us that we are a resilient animal that can overcome difficult moments of trauma in a really kind of emotional way. The Martian has loads of moments. It's not emotionless at all. And I think that Watney, what you said about him being that kind of guy that like just gets on it, he has moments of real bleakness.
Yeah.
And they're all the more powerful because we know that he doesn't want to be that guy. He's a sunny side guy, but everything's conspiring against him in this film, isn't it?
He hides a bit of humour, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That's his sort of like coping mechanism, which kind of works for his character. But yeah, sort of the ingenuity thing you were talking about. This film, so in the book which we mentioned previously, James Cameron's Story of Science Fiction, he references The Martian a lot. And he always says about this, the line in The Martian where it says, I'm going to science the shit out of it.
Yeah.
So that is the sort of mentality you need to have with these kind of things. You need to be able to be like, right, so there's the problem. How are we going to solve it with science? What can we do? What is going to happen? Let's think about the variables.
So that kind of approach to it. And also the plot itself, which is a guy, an astronaut, a NASA astronaut who is stranded and in trouble, and he has to work on his own and with the people at home to overcome that problem scientifically and logically. That approach really makes it feel like a spiritual sequel to Apollo 13, right? I think there's a lot in common. You've got the characters who are working day and night, the engineers on Earth, really just giving it, pushing their, pushing to the limits of their endurance. So is Mark on Mars, but they're also working on complex mathematical and scientific problems while they do that. It really feels similar. And there's a big reference to it as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
Did you catch that? Because I mentioned this to you when we watched Apollo 13.
Yeah, so as soon as they said it, as soon as it came up on the screen, I was like, that's what Matt meant.
I'm glad you remembered, yeah. It's the Steely-Eyed Missile Man.
Yeah.
Which is a real thing within NASA. And I think the character in Apollo 13 who is called a Steely-Eyed Missile Man, he's the real person who was originally called that in NASA in the 60s.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen on Apollo 13. There was an incident on a previous one, I think the one before, I think Apollo 12. Something went wrong and he was an engineer and they were about to abort the mission, and he remembered some like auxiliary system that they lost all their electronics because of a lightning strike, I think.
Yeah.
And he remembered from some earlier simulation or just randomly that there was actually a backup sort of circuit. There's just a switch you can flick to. And he just sort of piped up on the radio and just went, switch to aux 4 or something like that. And there's like, because there's recordings of every mission control dialogue that I think are publicly available. There's recordings of who's the character? Ed Harris, his character in Apollo 13, the guy running the show.
But I know exactly who you mean.
His equivalent saying something like, what the hell did you just say? Or like, what the hell does that mean? And the guy just takes over the mic again and just goes, switch to aux 4. And they do it and it saves the day. And he got this nickname. He's a Steely-Eyed Missile Man. And it kind of enters into like NASA legend, It's like if you call a colleague a Steely-Eyed Missile Man, that's a real like term of endearment and respect. Like it's kind of lived on past that event. So it feeds into this sort of legend of NASA that the Martian kind of grabs a hold of and makes a story out of. And we have another engineer character who saves the day with his crazy out of the blue idea.
Yeah, but his idea is very similar to what they planned in Apollo 13.
Yeah.
So they slingshot around Earth, don't they, in this case?
believe it happens in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home as well.
Everyone's always slingshotting around planets.
We love a slingshot.
Yeah.
They do it in Passengers as well, actually.
Do they?
Yeah. Halfway through the journey, they're going to slingshot around a sun.
If you're running out of fuel, you have to slingshot around some sort of planet.
Yeah. But it makes sense. You know, it's the kind of gravity. And I think they do it don't they do it in 2010? Isn't that how they're able to leave the orbit of Jupiter a little bit earlier? Because
they do, don't they? Yeah.
They were going to wait like 30 days to come out of orbit or something like
that.
Yeah. So what's his name? Parnell. He gets the honor of being one of the Steely-Eyed Missile Men of NASA.
What I'm proposing is we start accelerating immediately to preserve velocity and gain even more. We don't intercept with Earth at all, but we come close enough to get a gravity assist and adjust course. While we're doing that, we resupply with the probe.
The Taiyang Shen.
Pick up whatever provisions we need, and now we're accelerating towards Mars.
So obviously Apollo 13, we talked about the references for that. Did you notice the Destination Moon reference?
Which one are you talking about? It definitely felt like Destination Moon at the very end.
Yeah. So when they're trying to get rid of the stuff on the ship in order to make sure they've got the right amount of weight to get out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the final of all the kind of like scrambled together schemes they've got to put together to get that Watney has to do himself and also NASA gives him. One of them is to literally like tear everything out of the Ares 4 launcher, tear the front off it, replace it with some canvas. It's terrifying.
That entire bit's brilliant as well. And then they send him a message saying, "Oh yeah, so we're just going to put a bit of tarp on the front, and then that'll protect you." And he's like, "What?
Yeah,
what the hell?" And then there's a really funny moment where they're sort of saying, because all of his messages are in text.
Yeah.
So they try and reread it in a different tone, and they go, "Do you think he means it like this?
That's a good
or do you
bit,
think it means it like this?"
Yeah.
And I love all of that because it's just like, again, the comedy elements in there.
They do that. That concept is first introduced when he first gets messaging up and running with Earth. He finds out that they haven't told the crew on the Hermes that he's still alive, and he's just swearing up a storm in the text.
Yeah.
And they have to send him a message saying, please moderate your language, you're being broadcast around the world. And he doesn't, understandably, he doesn't moderate his language.
And then so there's a moment in the film which they don't really explain. So he types something back when they're complaining about his language because they say, "So what is that?"
I don't know if it's written in the book, but I think we can just assume that he uses stronger and more swear words.
Because I read somewhere that because he knows that everyone in the world's reading it. So what he does is he types in, "Look, a pair of boobs."
Oh, right.
And then does bracket dot y dot bracket.
Oh, nice.
Just because he knows that, apparently that's in the book. I don't know if that's...
I can't remember. Yeah, that sounds like something he'd do. That's like his kind of character.
But again, I think, that sort of might be something that might not have translated in the film.
I don't know. Why wouldn't you just show that? I assumed he was dropping just like a string of unrepeatable
but they
words.
purposefully sort of like don't show it, do they?
It's nice. Leave
but
it to your imagination.
I quite like the idea that he's just drawing a pair of boobs.
Yeah, I think you can't leave it to someone's imagination in a book.
Yeah.
But you can in a film.
Yeah,
because you've got the reactions on screen.
So did you notice any other sort of like film references in there?
So another film that it kind of reminded me of was 2001 in a stylistic sense, but also in like a design of the ship sense, because the Hermes, I mean, in particular, the way the Hermes generates gravity, it's a massive barrel. And it works really well. It's really cool in the film because they kind of, if they're working in the central zone, it's all 0G.
Yeah.
And then they'll kind of float into a gravity area and the gravity slowly builds up as they get closer to the circumference of this barrel. And that's the same as the Jupiter 1, isn't it? When we see Dave exercising, he's exercising in like a big barrel, basically.
Yeah.
And I think it's the rotation is supposed to be what's generating gravity for them. And they do the same thing in the Hermes. So it kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, it's definitely very sort of 2001 inspired, isn't it?
And it's also just that kind of clinical, clean, futuristic design for the Hermes. It's quite cool when they go about and they just like blow it up at the end to sort of, they're basically doing the same like rigging of it that Mark's been having to do on Mars.
Yeah.
And they've got the same mindset we see at the end. They're happy to just blow up the front of their ship because it's going to save their friend. which is
Yeah.
great and really exciting.
And sort of like that cleanliness of that spaceship is a bit of a contrast to the sort of dusty Mars that we keep seeing Watney on.
Yeah, and Watney he goes all in on that dirtiness, doesn't he? Because he's bringing that inside. He brings in a load of that dust, and then he brings in literal shit to create his own fertilizer. He turns into this kind of ragged, skinny, hairy guy, doesn't he? And that's a big way that it feels different to, Gravity feels like all is lost. This film feels like Castaway, he's like Tom Hanks. He's embraced the wild and become a Martian.
Yeah.
And he gets to define what a Martian is, and it's this kind of ragged castaway guy. But it's really interesting that towards the end of the film, when he knows rescue is on its way, he does take time out to shave off his beard and cut his hair. It's an interesting kind of, I don't know if it was like, he's like a savage that's returning to civilization and he recognizes that, or is it just like allowing himself a little moment of self-care and looking after yourself when he's really not been able to do stuff like that? The looking after himself has been pure survivalism.
Yeah, it did feel like that, didn't it?
Yeah.
And it's the whole sort of the longevity of it, because whereas Gravity is fast paced and it's all happening at once. Like I said, it's like Castaway this. It's like Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah.
Interestingly, they did a film called Robinson Crusoe on Mars.
Yeah.
I've not seen that. I don't know much about it, but I don't think it's quite at the same level as The Martian. But that's what I kept thinking about, because it is sort of like the tale of this man having to sort of get by with very little, stranded on this place. He trying to sort of like keep himself sane as well.
Yeah.
And the way he stays sane, I find fascinating, because everyone back home keeps saying, oh, he's going to lose his mind. Like, how, being that far away from anyone on your own, how are you going to stay like normal?
And then there's a smash cut to him as he dancing to disco music.
Yes, dancing to disco music, having a great time. And he's always like, again, with all the jokes and stuff, and he's going through everyone's stuff, and he's like, oh, what is this weird leather-bound game that he finds or something like that?
What was he found one of them's got like old Atari games or something, isn't there?
But they're like weird, sexy Atari games, aren't they? Like bondagey or something weird.
Yeah. He gets a crucifix. That's a really important little thing that he takes out, because he's got nothing he can ignite because everything's so fireproof. But he's realised he needs to make fire so that he can distill water from. He's got a massive supply of, is it hydrogen?
Yeah.
And he must have oxygen as well. He's got oxygen generators. And with those two things, plus fire, he can create water.
Yeah, because he goes into detail about how they make sure that there's nothing flammable on these rockets.
We know why from Apollo 13 and the earlier Apollo mission. Is it Apollo 1, I think, that ended completely disastrously? Yeah.
So, but then that doesn't do him any favours when he's trying to sort of like make water and make fire in order to make all these crops so he can survive.
Yeah. Goes wrong in exactly the way that NASA would be afraid it would go wrong. It blows himself up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then he gets back up and he's back to doing it.
Moments like that in the book are amazing. I think it's that joke about, so I blew myself up, that's played exactly the same way in the book. I think it works a bit better in the book because it's like the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next chapter, I think, is the next chapter starts with his log saying, so I blew myself up.
So, yeah, I blew myself up.
The other bit that they didn't quite manage to capture how tense it is in the film is, when the whole airlock ruptures and blows up and sends him flying from it. When that happened in the book, he's trapped in the airlock for quite a few pages in the book, and it's just sitting with him as he talks to himself, trying to figure out how to solve it. And like the hab is destroyed, that all the plants are ruined, and and I just remember reading that and just it's such an exciting point and part of the book because it's very unexpected, and even with this character that you've got to know, it's like I can't imagine how he's getting out of this one. He's fucked. But he does. He works it out. He sellotapes his helmet back together.
Yeah, when he's sellotaping the helmet as well, it's just so many sort of like stress moments.
Yeah.
But he's still like as calm as he can be when he's doing it. And when you're watching it and he's trying to get that tape on, it's like, come on, just get it. There's a little bit.
The best moment of that is one of the bits of tape folds into itself and sticks to itself.
Yeah,
and
it's so relatable.
It's very relatable, but it's not played for laughs. Of all the things they do play for laughs, that's not.
Yeah.
It's actually just like, oh, for God's sake, like you can see where he's coming from. Like,
because he's got the beep and it's like the beeping sound that is saying like your oxygen is running out, you need to do something.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Very tense. So this film, I think Dr. Stone in Gravity doesn't get a lot of time to think about her loneliness. It's all about the immediacy of the problem at hand. When you stretch that shipwreck out over the course of a year, the character involved has a long time to consider how lonely they are. What were the things that you liked or didn't like maybe that kind of captured that loneliness for Mark?
Well, I think it was just the way that he was getting on with things was the main thing for me. But also the sort of switch in his character when he finally makes contact with NASA. And then he says like, oh, now I can't get them to shut up.
But I think he's being, that's a bit of his humour, isn't it? I don't think he'd want them to shut up.
Yeah. And it's just like, even when it's like, so that loneliness does build though in his character and you can see it. And he's trying to work out what to do. And then when he first is stranded, he says, right, so this is how much I've got. This is what will happen. Like, I'll probably die. And he works out and then he goes, no, actually, I'm not going to do that. So he has that sort of evolution bit that we talked about with Stone's character in Gravity, but he has that at the beginning a bit more. So he's kind of like, right, this is what could happen. Actually, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do everything I can. And because he's a botanist, he's the best person to be in that situation.
Yeah, that's a bit of luck for him.
Yeah.
He never factors in loneliness into his calculations, I don't think. There is a really lovely moment. It's probably about halfway through the film where I can't even remember why he's out and about, but you see a shot of him just sitting on a rock looking out at the Martian landscape. And it looks, it's gorgeous. It's like, it's kind of shot like a Western.
Yeah.
You've got this rocky desert landscape and he's very small and central in it. And he just looks like a sort of sad little boy who's got no friends in the playground sitting on, kind of looking out. The colour of his suit is kind of a dusty red, so he kind of just blends in and he's just sort of part of the planet and all on his own in this. I think it's accompanied with a bit of narration from him where he's saying like he's the first person to put footsteps here and stand on this rock and stuff like that.
Everywhere he goes, he's the first person to do it.
But it's tinged with sadness in that moment because he's so alone and it looks great. Have you seen the recent landscape photo of the Martian landscape?
No. So
NASA a few weeks ago, I'll tweet this out. I'll tweet out the link in the picture from at Journey Through Sci-Fi. They've just released this the highest resolution picture of the Martian landscape. It's pieced together of like hundreds of photos from their rover, and it's all been properly lined up. So it's like, jagged edges because of the lining up, but the actual landscape itself is
amazing,
realistically pictured. And it looks incredible. It doesn't look like the Martian. It just looks like a sort of bit of rocky terrain on Earth. It's amazing. Like you wouldn't, so they make the sky in the Martian very dusty and red to sort of capture that dustiness of it being everywhere. But actually, when there's not a dust storm, we see from this photo that NASA released, it just kind of looks like Earth's sky. It's a bluey sort of grey sky.
That's mad. Yeah.
I'll get the link and I'll put it on our Twitter account because it's really something to see.
But the fact you referred to it as a Western as well, it does have that kind of like stranded in the desert kind of vibe to it, doesn't it?
Like some of the scenes in The Searchers. I don't know if have you seen that one? It's the one where John Wayne and another character basically just have to ride from one place to another, and it takes them like over a year.
Oh wow!
So we see there's scenes in that where it's like winter as well, but But yeah, just them riding through the desert or having characters just stranded out in the middle of nowhere in a desert is a very Western trope, isn't it?
It's like a new frontier, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what's happening in this as well.
But ramped up to the extreme.
Yeah, and the way you're talking about sort of like the journeys that they were going on, he's doing all that on his own, but he's got the added extremes of there's no atmosphere.
Yeah.
And he's trying to sort of deal with all that on top of things. And when he's in the rover and he has to use the plutonium to heat himself up.
Yeah.
Just mad things like that.
Yeah.
It's just so good.
He goes and digs it up from under a flag that I think has like a skull and crossbones or something on it. Yeah, it's great.
See, I'd seen that clip so many times. I did not realise that's what it was. Yeah.
Oh, right.
I thought it was like him like taking out a flag of them claiming Mars or something.
Oh, right. Okay.
Had no idea it was because it's toxic waste, basically.
Yeah. So you talked about how it's quite an uplifting film. There's like a middle chunk where it is irresistibly optimistic and upbeat. I would say there's too many like musical montages in this film, right?
Lots of great musical montages, you mean?
A musical montage is kind of an easy way to, we know an easy way to progress a story, but also depending on what song you set it to, it can be a pretty easy emotional button to press.
Yeah.
So David Bowie, Starman.
Yeah. That was great.
It is really good. Yeah. But they repeat that 3 times. Yeah. But it is good. That's a really good scene. That's where we see the kind of the real optimism of the film kicking into gear, isn't it? That's where I think that's the montage where the Chinese space agency are now cooperating with the Americans, and we've got a plan, and everyone's working together. The whole planet's coming together, and
yeah, that is the moment, isn't it?
I think so.
And they're all sort of, the whole, again, everybody's working together to make sure that he gets home. And I love that aspect of it as well. It's very sort of like Star Trek in its sort of morals, this film.
Yeah, it's utopic. Is that the word?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. Kind of maybe reminds me a little bit of The Wandering Earth.
Yeah.
That was all about countries coming together, although it was kind of anti-government bodies. It was more about the working classes coming together.
Yeah, this felt less political in what it was doing.
Yeah.
It's more just sort of like this, everyone's working together for the greater good to save this one guy.
Although I do think, isn't there a moment when the Chinese, the Chinese Space Agency staff, they say, what should we do about this? They've got a moment where like, we can help. What should we do? And specifically the director of the space agency says, well, let's reach out directly to NASA, scientist to scientist. Is the implication of that, let's not go via our respective governments because that won't end well? Is that what he's implying?
Maybe, yeah.
Because he does say something about we should do this scientist to scientist. Whereas maybe the Chinese government, if this is set in the very near future or present day, the current Chinese government might not be so obliged to use their beautiful new
booster rocket,
waste that opportunity for their own Martian trip to save one American astronaut.
Yeah. It's interesting because the military element isn't really in this film either.
No,
there's 2 characters which are ex-military or military.
Current, the commander and the other comedy guy.
The guy who's in Ant-Man.
That's it. Yeah.
Martinez,
of course it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Lewis and Martinez are...
played by Michael Pena.
Oh, yeah. He's been in a lot, but he's like a character actor, isn't he? He's always the kind of funny friend.
Yeah.
They are described as military people, but it's not a big element of how they... Because all of these characters end up agreeing on the same thing anyway.
Yeah, and again, this sort of like utopic element, they all decide, right, we're going to go back and save our friend... because that's what we should do.
Even though it's like an extra 2 years away from Earth. And,
yeah. And they've got all the montage of everyone talking to their families. So you've got more backstory on them. You understand that they've got other stuff going on.
Yeah.
They could easily just be like, actually, we just want to go home.
Yeah. One of them's got a young kid.
Yeah.
The other one's married. I don't know if she's got kids or not. But yeah, they've got stuff to leave behind, but there's no hesitation in any of them. They all want to save Watney. They even say, it's what he'd do for us. And yeah.
When I first watched it, when I was watching it, I wasn't sure whether Watney and Lewis had some sort of relationship at the beginning. Because certain bits were like, oh, maybe they've got there a bit more than what they seem, but they're not.
No, there's a relationship going on with Vogel and Beck.
Yeah, so that sort of like comes out towards the end of the film. But it was just the fact that he looked at Lewis's box first, and that Lewis was visibly sad. Well, obviously she's sad because that's one of her crew members, she's in charge.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, I thought, oh, maybe there's going to be something there. And the fact that he says to her, if you like, go and see my parents because I trust you to go and sort of talk to them.
No, I think
they've got like a very good friendship, haven't they?
It's a platonic, professional, respectful relationship. Yeah,
which I liked as well because it's just, you see this in so many films. It's always some sort of romantic link. It's nice to have something where it is like it's just a really close friendship.
Yeah, they don't play anything. I think the film, maybe even it kind of struggles for that. I don't think it would benefit from it, but if you're trying to make a really straightforward film, you maybe want to give your leading man a leading lady.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why that kind of tension feels like it might be there. There's also a bit like, I think her name's Mindy, the one who is like the satellite operator. Yep. She's kind of watching over him, and I don't know if it feels a bit awkward, like she's supposed to be developing a crush on him or something like that. Which again, I don't think is necessary or really even, I don't think it really exists in the film, but there's moments where it's almost like that's what they're leaning towards.
Interesting.
I don't think it's necessary. And I don't, I don't think there's any kind of relationship. I love that scene where he's recording a message for Lewis saying, please talk to my parents. And the way he phrases it is great. It's just like, I'm sorry. I know this is going to be extremely bad, but you're my commander. Basically, this is part of your job.
Yeah.
I trust you to do this because I respect you, and I also need you to do this because it's your responsibility.
Yeah, it's really emotional. That.
Yeah. He knows how much impact that's going to have. She's great as well. So it's Jessica Chastain again.
Yeah.
Who we talked about recently in Interstellar. It's another chance for her to do what she does best, which is like a very emotional performance restrained by a lot of control. There's not always, but we've seen her do this where there's a lot of passion bubbling away behind a really in control person who's in charge of a situation.
We talked about how everybody's working together, and there's no real antagonist per se in this film or Gravity. It's more the conditions that they're under.
Yeah.
But I think at one point there were talks about making Teddy kind of the antagonist character. So Teddy, who is one of the he's like the person in charge of mission control.
Yeah.
And NASA.
Yeah.
He's like the director of NASA, isn't he?
Yeah, Jeff Daniels.
Yeah, but I like the fact that he's stern and he's thinking about everything, but when it comes down to it, he'll think about the best interests of everybody else as well.
Yeah, he's got to factor in some of the unpleasant stuff, which is how it's going to play in the media, how it makes the agency look, money constraints and stuff like that. He's got to factor in some of the things that, if you're talking about saving a life, a lot of people might find distasteful. So I can see how he could be could have once been a villainous character.
They could have played him more like the guy who I hated in Contact.
Yeah, he is. It's a similar role, and if his intentions were different, he would be a similar character.
Yeah.
But I think because it romanticizes NASA as an organization, its history and the people who work there, it just wouldn't be right for such a senior person in that organization to be a bit of shit.
Yeah, exactly, because it would portray them in a different light, and you need to have this positive view of NASA in order to put everything they're putting across.
Yeah. There's a great bit where he does end up cutting corners, and it costs their mission a lot, doesn't he? He says don't test the launch because they want to get their refuel probe up in the air and get it to... It's going to Watney at that point, just before Rich Parnell's Missile Man moment.
Donald Glover.
Yeah. Childish Gambino.
Yeah. I was very excited to see him in this film.
He's good, isn't it? He's a lot of fun. But yeah, he decides to... It's like the only time he kind of bends the rules, and he's not the stern guy. He says, we're going to cut a corner here. And it costs so much. It's, at that point in the film, it might cost Mark's life.
Exactly.
And that's got to sit on his shoulders.
Yeah.
But he did it for the right reasons. He's very good.
And I mean, we talked about the longevity of how long he's up there on Mars on his own, the physical impact of that as well. Like, you see how skinny Watney becomes by the end of it. And we talked about how his beard's longer and his hair's longer and he does sort of trim up. But he's got like sores on him and stuff like that. And it's really intense, but he doesn't let it get him down. Which is just like, it's so shocking to see in some ways because he's just sort of dealing with it as it comes.
Yeah. He's malnourished and just falling apart. He's been eating nothing but potatoes for most of a year. Yeah.
And like when you see him at the start, he's like a big, strong guy. And then just to see him by the end of it, just like nothing but sort of skin and bones.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even fill up the spacesuit in the same way that he did before.
He looks very small in it.
Yeah, it's all these little things that just sort of like... So as much as he's getting on with things and you see this facade almost, you see the impact that this living like this has had on him. Very full on.
Yeah, it's good. And he smells.
Yeah, he smells. That's the first thing the guys say.
Because he's had no access to cleaning, or he wouldn't use any of his water for showering, obviously. Yeah, grim.
And he's just dealing with poo all the time.
But he loves it because he's a space farmer.
He is Mars's best botanist.
Yeah, so all of that optimism, I mean, it can only go one way. And this film, both of these films have a very happy ending, don't they?
Yeah.
But I think, like you said earlier, because there's no body count, this is a much more optimistic and happy ending film than Gravity.
Yeah. And when you were watching this for the first time, you had read the book, but even when you were reading the book, did you ever think there was a chance that he wouldn't make it?
No. I was very surprised the way it goes and all the stuff where, the Hermes returns, because I just thought, well, I'm just going to read the story of the guy who keeps himself alive for long enough to be rescued.
Yeah.
So I think they play it in a really interesting way to make it more interesting than that. I mean, you hadn't read the book. What did you think?
I didn't see a scenario where he wouldn't make it.
It's not that the tone isn't
the
right.
The tone of the film is an optimistic one, and it's generally positive, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I kind of had that, but then it was kind of like, what's gonna go wrong next?
Yeah.
What's the next problem he's going to have to go up against? And
that's the whole point, isn't it? It's NASA's ability throughout the ages to overcome adversity with their intelligence, and it's it's like an advert for NASA, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's got to have a happy
ending. It's a very good advert for NASA.
Yeah.
I mean, it got 7 nominations, didn't it?
It was well received, wasn't it? It did quite well. Yeah. And I think that's maybe part of the reason why, because you said before that you feel like you could rewatch this more than Gravity.
Yeah.
Gravity is a real experience, isn't it? It's like I said, like I've been saying, it's a very emotional film. It's supposed to hit you emotionally and hit you in the gut. And The Martian is much more of a kind of audience-pleasing movie, right? And you're supposed to just enjoy it and enjoy the montages and be happy. But it works so well. It's very well put together.
So how did you feel about being stranded in space in this episode then, Matt?
I feel like we've gone on a real emotional journey. I love the way that we had the intensity of experiencing a shipwreck in space with Sandra Bullock, and then we've kind of turned it around and gone on this kind of happy ending journey with Mark Watney being reunited with his friends.
Yeah, definitely. They're both sort of like very different experiences as films to watch.
Yeah.
So do you feel calm now?
Yeah, I feel like we're on the other side of it. Okay. I'm much more settled.
Well, next episode, we're going to give you an existential crisis.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So next week, we will be looking at 2 recent films. We'll be looking at Aniara and High Life.
Yeah, people just losing it, I guess, in space.
People losing it in space. So I haven't watched either of these.
No, me neither.
But they've been on my watch list, and I'm very excited to look at them next week.
Yeah, definitely High Life when that came out. And I don't know anything about Aniara. So,
okay, well, hopefully I've picked a good one for you.
Good. Thank you, James. All right, then. That's all we've got time for this week. Please leave us a review. Say something nice. Tell us how you would feel about being stranded in space. And leave us 5 stars while you're doing it.
Yeah, feel free to get in contact. We have the website, which is journeythroughsci-fi.com. You can get us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We are at Through Sci-Fi Pod or at Through Sci-Fi.
Or you can send us an email at journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com. Drop us a line, say hello. We'll say hello back.
Yes, please. And we'll see you next time.